Oh, it's Accessibility Day. It's not super accessible at the moment, but I just want you guys to just have a guess. Anyone? Yes? All of government design standard? Yes, close. Anyone? Yeah, you might have seen our blog before. Yeah, I have to say, yeah, since I joined government, I mean, it's probably the place that I've seen the most acronyms and numeronyms all over the place. But yeah, so there you go. That's accessibility, all of government design system. So hi everyone, my name is Jas, and I'm the UX product lead for the all of government design system. I'm currently working at DIA, part of the Navigate program. So this is Joe. Joe is the senior designer from Springload, working on the design system. And Matthew is the tech lead, working on the all of government design system as well.
Yep, that's true.
So before I hand you guys over to him, I want to give some really quick introduction in terms of giving the context and the background for this project. I'm going to go next. So this is one of the image from our co-design workshop. I think it's has a lot of things that we want to say in here. So I'm going to start with the background of the project. There was a proof of concept done for the design system of pattern library in August last year. So that was before I joined DIA. When I started with DIA in January, and up until now, we did. I mean, for us, when we started the project, I was interested in doing just enough research for us to get this project off the ground. And what we did was we interviewed 12 staff from 6 government agencies, and these include designer, developers, content designer, and a few product owners. That was important for us to kind of understand their current workflows, their pain points, the tools that they use in their day-to-day when building website, especially government website or government project. So that gave us a lot of interesting insight and feedback, and that helped us to make certain design decision and product decision. During that time, Joe and Matt also did a lot of research in terms of looking at other government, other design system from other government around the world. So they were looking into the UK one, the Australian one, the Canadian one, and did I miss something? The American one. Yeah, can't miss out the American. And I think there are some smaller European one. So that also gave us a lot of interesting insight. From then, we start like a six sprints of building the alpha. We've also been talking at meetup, but also engage with different government agencies and present the concept of design system. Recently, around 2 weeks ago, we also started this workshop engaging with designer, developer, content designer, managers from different government agencies. And this time also involve suppliers or vendors that build website around town in that workshop. That was a really, really, I mean, incredible and great workshop, and we got lots of good insights in terms of helping us moving into the next phase of the project. In terms of current status, we are currently in alpha and we're currently in testing at the moment, and we're aiming for to release the alpha around end of May. So that's pretty much around the background for this project. I'll hand you guys over to Joe and Matthew, where they can talk more about design and technical approach for the design system. Do you guys have any questions so far? Or we can wait until the end. I can take more questions. Yeah. Oh.
Thanks, Jas. Does everyone know what a design system is first? Is there anyone who's unclear? Raise your hand, maybe. Good. So it's interesting. I think lots of design. It's very in vogue to talk about it. We're just looking at a Twitter account that was parodying that just before. It's like everyone's suddenly talking about design systems, and they were previously called pattern libraries and before style guides, although they're often about content as well. So I think it's an interesting landscape, but I think that they're really valuable, and especially for accessibility. So the government has, for private government websites, are required to meet web accessibility standards. So unlike the private sector, they've got this benchmark that you have to meet. So that's a very important approach when we were working with the design system, that accessibility was baked in at the core of what we're doing. And I would argue that websites should all be accessible by default. Even in some countries, it's illegal to not have an accessible website for certain sectors. We think that it's very important to be at the core of what we do. It's cool that there's an event like this sort of celebrating it. I'm going to say one of the main benefits of having accessibility baked into a design system is then government agencies won't have to relitigate, redesign, research, and build yet another website meeting these web accessibility standards. So one of the benefits of this design system will be saving money and effort. So hopefully people can spend their budgets on better problems, testing, more features, better content. Yes, content. This is our content designer over here. Now, speaking of that, clear content. So because things are accessible, part of the accessibility guidelines is to write in a clear way, understandable, relatable, consistency, so that'll help all users of the sites that are built with design systems. And then also another bonus is consistency. So once widely adopted, end users of government websites will hopefully have a consistent, accessible experience using these systems, or sites built with these systems. It's an interesting point, like often while we're working on this project, is that our users are agencies and vendors, but they also have their users. So it's unlike a typical site build or product build, you have our users are not the end user, but we're building the accessibility for the end user. That's the most important thing. So we did lots of research on accessibility for the design system, and we took a best practice approach. This is one of the things that I personally really like about this project, is I'm not designing something for someone to have subjective opinions about and to sell something, or it's actually for all New Zealanders and all citizens, so that so have the best experience. So we took a best practice approach, researching other government systems, as Jas says, as well as commercial examples. And then we're sort of navigating a path through all these different types of design systems and identifying what we think is the best answer to design problems or issues or how to build things. And so because we base the majority of our design system on the gov.uk system from DDS, and we get all the benefits of all the research that they've done into accessibility for free, basically. And they gave us the keys to it. We could sort of download their entire system and then port it across to our needs. Yeah, and some of the needs that we have in the New Zealand system, like some of the unique requirements.
Yeah, so initially we were deciding whether or not to do a bespoke design system, whether or not to build everything. But after really considering what other governments around the world are facing, they do really have problems. We're all trying to make sure that their citizens engage with government, not excluded. Of course, there's only one place you can go in government, in New Zealand to get a passport. Only, sort of government has a unique sort of responsibility to be inclusive. Perhaps a little bit like the privacy. So we just to summarize that then, we felt that government had a particular responsibility to be able to be engaged with the citizenry and to be able to make sure that people can actually still have access to this kind of stuff, perhaps, and that might be a slightly distinction there from the private sector, where there might be multiple options available, although of course I personally believe that they should all be accessible, government certainly has that responsibility and a legal obligation to do that. So the UK design system, they test all of their components in there in about 3 different screen readers, if not more. So they test in NVDA and JAWS and a bunch of sort of operating system screen readers. So that's quite good that it actually has that robustness in there. But we did find that we had some unique requirements in New Zealand. An obvious thing, of course, would be bilingualism. So since mid last year, the NVDA screen reader can read Maori, so it can pronounce Maori words correctly, but it just requires you to actually embed the information in the web page about which language this part of it is. So we thought that that was a unique requirement, but that didn't really, that wasn't really a blocker on the idea of using the UK system that they've mostly designed it for English. We found that we could just adapt it in ways and actually just be able to insert arbitrary content within parts of the design system. So that was sort of answering that kind of question. Yeah.
And so we're going to do some more research. Like, we're only just at the beginning of our journey in Alpha. There's a lot to do, so we want to look at the impact of dual language or more than 2 languages and things like menus. Is that a good idea, or is it a bad idea, or is it better just to weave Te Reo Māori into content? And then there's certain things you can do with headlines where they should be the same size. That's definitely something we're going to work on next. We want to do more user testing and research from an accessibility point of view. So we are making slight tweaks to what gov.uk system is built. So we want to make sure that we're not undoing any of that work, as well as doing technical accessibility testing.
So I can speak to the UK example. Sure. Yeah. So the question was whether or not people from accessibility communities were involved in reviewing the design system quality in overseas government efforts of design systems. That was. Mm-hmm. Yes, and so then the follow-up, the sort of continuing question was about whether or not those communities, whether or not the government essentially would have a different set of values or judgments compared to the communities affected and who may have particular disability requirements. So the answer is yes, essentially. The British did a lot of testing and they did a lot of engagement with communities. They've got blog posts about this where they've engaged those communities and asked them what they think and made revisions based on this. All of the source code to the design system is available on GitHub. There are changes all through that, and you can, as a developer, so I can see that they've made particular changes based on feedback. That's happened quite regularly.
So I have one more point to add. So if you go to GDS website, they do actually have 6 disability and impairment kind of user profile, and they say, for example, say people with dyslexia or etc. or colorblind, and when they test the design system, they test against these user profile, and most of the problem that they found was around form elements, and they do write a report around like I think they found like 40 things, and then they fixed 28 or 30. So I think that's quite a really good list that you can go through, and yeah, there's lots of great documentation on their site on that.
And the last point here on my slide is about adoption, and I think this is key to the success of the design system. And we see solving accessibility needs as a key benefit to help get government agencies to want to try out the design system, and everyone can benefit, hopefully. So how do we go about it? How do we bake in accessibility? So it was a bit of a balancing act for taking these elements from the gov.uk system and then changing them for our use. So we didn't want to change things too much from an aesthetic point of view and how they're built. So we're definitely sort of straddling the balance of that at the moment, and we'll probably need to test to make sure that we haven't undone any of this great research. But like a particular example for this is we really like the way that the Australian design system approached focus color. So they are, the gov.uk system has a focus color that is yellow. And so when keyboard users are tabbing through the page, the focus color could be confused with the alert color, which is really similar to yellow, and it didn't have enough contrast. Then we have adopted a purple focus color, which the Australians did. It was unique. So that's one example of where we've chosen one thing from another system, but we're trying to balance, or look at all these different systems and try and take the best approach from all of them. And everyone's really open, wants to talk about it, wants to help. So it's really great. And it's a very positive project in that sense. We're also working with Jason at DIA. I've called him the Accessibility Ninja. Jason Kiss. So he's a really great resource that we have on hand, and he has a wealth of information for help us to, from usability to accessibility content. So we've been using a lot. Awesome on the project. At one point in the near future, we're going to tackle theming, which will be a particularly gnarly problem because it's the government, the gov.uk system is a monolithic website. They've got one big government website, many different services under one umbrella, so they have one style and one system, whereas the approach that we'll be taking with our design system will have to be able to fit into different government agency brands. Whether or not our citizens think different agencies have brands is one interesting topic that should probably be looked into, but I'm sure the marketing managers at those agencies think it's very important. So we obviously have to support that and make sure that they can express their brand, but in a way so that it doesn't disrupt the usability or the accessibility of the site that they're building. So one of the ways we approach this is we have a color structure that we're going to have to try and extrapolate out to different brands. And the US system do a very good job of that. They've implemented 200 sites using their design system, and then they have the same approach that we'll have where an agency has their own brand. So we're going to look into how that works, but it's a very complicated puzzle of foreground and background colors and elements using different elements of these colors. And then how can you flip it to like an inverted dark mode? And then how can you apply an agency's brand, and they may have one brand color or they may have six. And so it's a fun puzzle that we have to solve soon. So that's probably a good segue to showing you some of the design system site where I can show you how we've worked on the color. So we figured out, we did an interesting little research piece where we looked at all different government agencies and picked out the colors and started to see some themes. So a lot of sites often have a gray suite or tints of thereof. And then we worked on some primary 2 and a primary 3 color. So the primary is a core brand color, which is a bit brighter. And then we have a 3:1 contrast ratio to meet WCAG accessibility for graphical objects that have to be distinct from the thing behind it, probably most likely white. And we have 4.5:1 contrast for when it has to be in text, or text has to be on it in white. And then we've got separate UI colors for focus and link active and visited. And then a whole UI suite of errors. And then we also have tried to unpick some of this one text color on another, making sure it sticks within 4.5 contrast. And from a design point of view, that's a lot of what accessibility means from the design system, is really just working with color contrast and how that applies to text and elements. Yeah. So, and also another important part of making accessible websites is that the structure and the content is way more important. So often maybe on a community you can put things in boxes or use lots of graphical elements, and that doesn't necessarily translate to a highly accessible design or approach. So the structure and the content of a website and the sort of HTML structure on the page is really much more important than a lot of other websites will probably view it as. And then finally, for the typeface, at the moment, we're typeface agnostic with the design system itself. It just uses sans serif. but we're looking at possibly free or open source typeface to use as the core typeface for a theme. But on the design system website at the moment, we've chosen the Klim font, National 2, and we really like the story behind that. That it's, Chris, when he was designing the typeface, it was about a typeface for New Zealand. So it kind of made sense for a design system for New Zealanders. But yeah, that's work.
Right, so yeah, I'm the lead developer on this project, and one of the, from a technical standpoint, when it comes to implementing these templates, these components, we found that, of course, that for any developers in the audience, and we've found that, of course, that people have their favorite templating language or their favorite framework that they prefer. So just to name drop a few, there might be, say, Moustache, there might be React, there might be Angular, there might be Vue, and you can probably just rattle off quite a few more of those. And what's happened internationally in design systems is that in the case of the United States, they provide HTML and CSS, of course, and that's it. And then when it comes to the UK, they provide HTML and CSS, and then a templating language called Nunjux, which came out of Mozilla, and which is not a very popular templating language, is fair to say. And so then the Australians chose, HTML, CSS, it's the web, and then they chose React as well. But anytime someone adds one of these things that has a templating language built in, they would have to re-implement all of these things manually. So they'd actually have to have a developer go and make a React version of this type of componentry, or go make an Angular version of this. It was a manual process, and because of that, they couldn't support that many frameworks because it was just too much. It was an onerous amount of work. So early on this project, when we were considering issues of adoption and how do we help people adopt it, well, from a technical standpoint, one of the obvious things was to try and meet people where they are with their current technology stack, because that means that they can potentially put the design system into their existing sites with the technology that they're comfortable with. But that technology didn't exist, something that could actually do this, so we decided to write it. One of the bits of software that we wrote was Meta Template. So this is software that can take arbitrary HTML and CSS. It can build, out of that, it can build React with JavaScript or TypeScript, React with styled components or not. It can build Vue, so VUE templates. It can build Silverstripe pages, so using a templating add-on to Silverstripe called Silverstripe Components. It can build Moustache templates, and I can't remember if there's any others. There's a few more, but that kind of thing. So essentially it's a generator that can do all this, and it means that adding support for more template formats in the future involves writing about, say, 500 to at the most 1,000 lines of code for a developer. So that might take them, say, about a week. But once you've done that one-off effort, then you can actually just get the whole design system in your language, in your favorite framework. So Meta Template is open source. It's released under the MIT license. I'll just click this. Feel free, go install it. Have a play, send me bug reports. Lots of information there about how it works as well. It supports, that's the other thing I was going to say, when it comes to styling, of course, as I said, it supports React with styled components, but it also supports Sass with Sass variables, and then it uses the same variable names for CSS variables. So CSS variables are a newer web technology that allows you to change parts of the styling on the fly in a page without a full page reload. So this is great when it comes to entering a form. If you're midway through a form and you want to change, say, for example, the theme, then this would potentially allow you to be able to switch out the theme on the fly to a high contrast theme without losing any of the things you typed into the form. Very important, I think. So that's Meta Template. Now I'm just going to continue talking about dev. So first of all, I'd just like to do a quick little survey. I love doing this one, but just to ask people, how many people here are developers? Could you just put up your hand, please? So how many people here have made a text box? Hope everyone's hand is still up, or yeah, very unusual developer. So how many people are confident that the text box itself was accessible? And what I mean by that is that if someone comes to their site and they're using, say, Firefox, and that gets a dark desktop theme, because Firefox inherits a dark desktop theme now for all text inputs, the background color of the text box will change. And if you only set the foreground color of the text, but not the background color, then your text will be illegible, right? How many people are confident that they're associating the right labels with the right input elements? Are they using ARIA described by to be able to associate that with any hint text that's associated with the text box? Okay, good. So we've got to, and I would hope so that the accessibility is good at this meetup. So that's promising. But you can still see here that even when it comes down to things that we perhaps think is simple, things like text boxes, there is actually quite a bit in there about how you make that accessible, isn't there, when you really think about it. So I'd say that for me, the value of a design system is about just reevaluating some basics and being able to re-implement these things and engineer them in really sort of modern ways so that we can actually get a lot more accessibility baked into the standard, well, into the design system. So now I'm just going to talk a little bit about some issues here around aligning IDs, macro components, and naming. So aligning IDs. Now, what I mean by this is that when it comes to accessibility in HTML, there is the label element, of course, and it can point to a input element, and it can refer to it by ID. So this is the the for attribute that you can see here. Is there any way to draw on this screen? No. Okay. Second line, there's the for attribute there. And this ID is, of course, lines up on the page, right? There's the same ID is repeated within the input. Or it should be. I hope I copied the right code. So there. But there's also other parts here you'll see. There's ARIA described by with any hint ID 10. And this this is a reference to this ID over here, which describes some additional information. It's not the label, but it's an additional hint or an additional description about how the form is and some additional text about how to use this form, how to use this particular field. So for developers, getting these IDs all lined up so that you've got the same ID, you've got the right ID in the right place is a bit of a hassle. It's a bit onerous to make sure you've got all these IDs. So this leads into one of the next questions that we had early on in this project, whether or not to provide micro components. This is a made up term, but I'm just gonna call it that. We'll call them micro components. So if we just provided guidance about how to put an input tag and a label on the page, then you would have to manually line up the IDs, right? In a bit of componentry and React or Vue. However, if we thought bigger and instead decided to think of things more as macro components, things that are grouped like this, then there is the potential then, because we have more of the HTML in the component, there is the potential that we can do some of that work for you. We can line up these IDs now because we're dealing with blocks, essentially, of text boxes or radio buttons or check boxes. These are repeated down the page in sort of blocks, let's say, and we can actually line up these IDs for you. And that's a feature currently of the design system, that it does all this for you. And so I think that's quite a useful feature. If you think about how expensive a template should be, how expensive a component should be, if it was to cover even more, then I think we'd probably lose some of the usefulness of the component. It would have a bit too much baked in. So it's definitely a judgment call around how much we should actually put into these templates, but the macro components is sort of essentially where we've been going. We do also, of course, it is HTML, it is CSS, you can still do micro components if you have a particular need to do that. But we've provided you some things that make it far easier to not shoot yourself in the foot by putting the wrong IDs in the wrong places. Now, theme colors, which is an issue that Joe touched on. When it comes to these things with theming, if there was, say, a red bit of text, for example, like an error message in a deep dark red, right? But you also use that color as a background, so as a background color in a button, for example. So you've got the same color red, right? One case it's used as a background for the background color of the button. One case it's used as the foreground color for an error, piece of error text, right? Because you're trying to alert a user to something. So in that case, if you had theming that just purely allowed someone to configure red, then how would you check if it complied with the WCAG 2.1 standards around color contrast? So really, affecting this about theming means that you need to actually tease out these differences and to know if a color in its use is actually going to be used as a foreground color in the system, or if it's going to be used as a background color. And if you put that into the design system, then that means that you can run automated tests over the thing. We can now know that this thing will be, this thing will be used and this thing passes or doesn't pass. It means that when it comes to theme creation, so if there's some kind of tooling that is made in the future around theming, then we can actually show people as they choose, do a color picker and start selecting the particular colors, we can give them that live information and that live feedback around what's available. So a lot of times when theming is done in systems, they just have a purely thing where let's define what red is or something, but we've tried to tease that out as per the accessibility standards so that it's all done appropriately. Was another issue there as well. Might need to fill for me for a second. Could you take over for a bit? I just need to think about this one. Is that cool?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Maybe while you think about it, I could actually show you the design system site. So here's our alpha site with its homepage. And we've got a few sections. 3 of them are still coming soon. So we have a get started section where we have information about getting started as different types of users, designers, developers, content designers, product owners, and project managers. And we'll have more coming here. And this section will morph into ways of how to install the system and guides for these different user groups and ways that they can use the design system. And that's really a big pro for a design system is all the documentation that comes with it, the guidance on how to write good copy for a button or what's the best way to write an error message. From a content point of view and from a design point of view, like this is how you shouldn't put more than 7 options in radio buttons maybe, or other such rules as that. And then we'll have a base section at the moment. We're just currently trying to figure out a different name for it. We've got a typography here where we have fonts, and, a heading structure, an element called headings with captions, some paragraph text, small, medium, large, links, lists, and then that'll just keep getting larger and larger as we go. And I already showed you the colors, and then we have components. So at the moment we have 3 release components: Flexbox Grid, so it uses Flexbox as the core grid technology. And we've got radio buttons of all different flavors and text inputs. And then we've got some other components coming soon, but then we have a whole swag of components, a very long list. There'll be like 50 in the end that will help you build that website. You remember?
I did remember.
Good.
Thanks, you're a lifesaver. I think it was flawless. No one noticed. Now, with theming, essentially, it's the point that I made earlier about how the theming system means that because we're considering theming and the colors and stuff like that, it means that you can avoid the full page reload, of course. So it means that if you want to be able to switch themes on the fly midway through a form, you're not going to lose any, of course, your form data. So that was what was sitting in the back of my brain, but I'd already said it earlier. Okay, now I was just going to give a little demo as well about this meta template technology that we've developed in this project. So as an example, here's a text input just showing conventional label that you can see there, the focus color. Here's what it looks like for HTML. Fairly straightforward, I hope everyone will think, the developers. But we can just switch to, here's what this technology called Silverstripe Components looks like. It's not a conventional Silverstripe template, but this is supported in Silverstripe. And it means that people can nest components within each other, which is not a feature of the normal Silverstripe templating language. And we've been talking to developers at Silverstripe about this, and they recommended this technology choice for our particular use case. and React, of course, React with TypeScript, style components, no CSS imports for the style components, of course, and that. What else? I think Stash is not connected up yet. That's fine. And yeah, it supports Vue and other things like that as well, but the design system doesn't currently have those options visible, but Meta Template itself does support that. So let me just look for some more complicated examples here. So you can see in the case of React with JavaScript, that yeah, we've got an input block and things like that with various error messages there so that you can, and it'll arrange all the HTML for you so that it's far easier to sort of build these componentry on the page. And of course, going back to the HTML one, little documentation there, trying to help people make sure you've imported the right bit of CSS for this particular component. And yeah, one of the ideas in the design system as well is that we didn't really want to have something where you'd need to do a full site redevelopment to be able to implement parts of the design system. So all of these parts of the design system are provided as fragments of CSS or Sass. You can build them into a particular process that would aggregate all of those files, of course, import them all, and then you'd be ended up with this monolithic Sass file, or Sass file build. But you can alternatively just import a bunch of little CSS files for the particular componentry that you had, because we're trying to make sure that the overhead for adding the design system to your site is as minimal as it can be. The file size of all these things has been really managed carefully, so that hopefully people can actually adopt it.
Discrete as well. So just use one part.
Yeah. But yeah, as you can see here, lots of examples. If we just go to say checkboxes, then we have what the checkboxes look like. Yeah, big sort of loud, bold designs, I suppose, around this, just to ensure that it's very, very clear that the visibility around this, the contrast is all very high. So you can do that. If we just again look at the template demonstration, that there's things like this, a component called a field set block, which has a checkbox block within it. And then there is, you can define what the label text is and things like that, and it will just generate, of course, the HTML for that. Any questions
How are
about
we doing
that?
for time? Yeah, we've got a
little bit. Yeah. So, I think do this. So I suppose as a developer, one of the things that I learned is that aligning IDs, of course, works well when you have macro style components. If you have to just wrap individual elements as a component, then you're really passing the effort back onto the individual developer, the individual implementer, and there's much greater chance for them to make a mistake. Configurable theme colors aren't enough. That's not enough to be a theme, right? To be an accessible theme, which of course is the theme tonight, then you have to be able to separate these things out into foreground and background colors as well. And then one of the things we found tooling, there's Axe Coconut, quite a nice browser plugin that can assess pages for sort of basic accessibility mistakes. So it can check whether or not IDs align on the page, and it can check some color contrast issues and things like that. So if the Axe Coconut is add-on for browsers is, I think it's just Chrome only, maybe. You sure? No? Firefox as well? Okay. So yeah, quite a nice plugin. So we've used that to help identify issues early on, of course. So maybe
Thanks, guys. So I guess I just want to say quickly that, as I said earlier, we're currently in alpha. We're currently in testing. So what we would really like is to get developers and designers to test the design system with us. If you have any projects that you would like to prototype or try to see if you can use the design system to prototype or build part of your project, or even just try like a one page, especially if you're in a government agency, feel free to email me, drop me a line, and we can work these things out together. Yes, and give me feedback. I think that's our question, and that's our contact details.
Good question. So currently we are aiming for A11 and, oh, sorry, yes. The question was around browser support and if there are, I suppose also insinuated that if there are particular technology choices that aren't supported, what happens in those browsers perhaps, or is there some kind of polyfill technology for that? Was that essentially? Yeah. So the question of browser compatibility, we're aiming for A11 and up. That doesn't necessarily mean that it has every single feature. So graceful degradation, of course, or progressive enhancement, which if you want to consider it the other way. So it's sort of the other way. The British government design system is compatible back to IE8. And so technically we could go that far, I suppose, and that's something we're looking for feedback on. If this is a deal breaker for your particular use case within government, we really want to know. So I really appreciate that kind of feedback. And then in terms of polyfills, yes, there is a polyfill for IE11 to support, say, CSS variables. It can only support top-level CSS variables. CSS variables can be scoped to parts of the DOM. So you can say that this variable setting that has a particular color, for example, or a font size or something like that, you can scope that on part of the DOM. So you can say that this div tag, every child node within that will have that. So A11 doesn't have that particular feature. But if you have theming that doesn't vary on parts of your page, which it probably isn't going to, then the polyfills do work for A11.
Thank you very much. Can we get a hand? If you have more questions, I suggest that you gather afterwards or the contact info. We're going to move on to our next segment. So thank you very, very, very much. No, it's great. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And somebody wants their computer. Cool. Thank you. We're going to take just 1 or 2 minutes to set up the panelists. So if you want to stretch your legs, refresh your drink, restroom, that's cool. Otherwise, we'll invite our panelists up.